Mr. Saito, is this reshuffle of the cabinet going to be a magical remedy to help the Prime Minister Abe bring up his approval rating?
I think that no one's really expecting a magical remedy, but the Prime Minister's goal here is that, going back to basics, that we listen to some of the referendums that have been going on at both the local and national levels, and really bringing in the people who are experienced in this to go back to what's meaningful and what the voters are asking for.
Mr. Saito, of course, has been working as the advisor for the Japanese Prime Minister. I'm sure he knows some inside information that would help us better judge. Yeah. And let me go to you, Mr. Yang, because you've been observing rather as an outsider, but look at the Japanese situation very closely because of its regional ties with China.
Yes.
Is this going to be the magical remedy?
No, from China's point of view, it's a sort of crisis management, saving the declining basis supporting rate for the cabinet's, Abe's cabinet's survival or sustainable survival. So no magical result. But the key question mark is lies in whether or not it's workable for survival.
One of the things people have been talking about is, what about these new members that have been brought in? And what about the sustainability of some of the original ones already in the cabinet? Why the Prime Minister has done and chosen these people? Some people in, some people out. Let's go to you, Mr. Saito, about the new foreign minister. Wow, this is a very new person and outspoken, sometimes even against the ruling party, the LDP, the party of the Prime Minister, Mr. Taro Kono, and also has been quite an, shall we say, outspoken person, an outlier even, in a way, in the Japanese way. So is he gonna bring in a different air to the cabinet, or a different air to the foreign policy, at least implementation of it, from Japan?
So I'm actually very good friends with Minister Kono, and he's actually a veteran politician. But what I think he brings to the mix this time is that he's been minister before. He knows what it is to be minister, but he also brings this balance that I think the Prime Minister felt was important, where you have a counterbalancing argument to weigh these sides of the argument. The other thing with Minister Kono is that he was also educated in the United States and graduated Georgetown. So his English and being able to discuss this, I think, garners a lot of respect, not only in the cabinet, but throughout the Japanese government. So
that's right. Well, whether the language efficiency is really going to help, it's a big question mark. But Mr. Yang, to you, the new foreign minister has to handle several issues. The relationship with the United States, which at this point, even though stable, and yet you have a new president in the White House, that's quite a new relationship. And also with regional players, China, South Korea as well. Meanwhile, there is the DPRK issue that's hanging in the air. And what about the regional cooperation in the northeastern part of Asia? All of these are the questions facing this new foreign minister. Is he going to do it differently?
Well, actually, you have listed all the major challenges facing the new foreign minister. As you mentioned earlier, he's outspoken, but for many Chinese, they look at the new minister as a moderate because of his father, also because of his own political views on many fundamental issues. So basically, I think such a moderate foreign minister would be helpful to deal with such a series of challenges you mentioned, ranging from the North Korea, from the bad China-Japan relation, from the uncertain Japan-US relation. So hopefully the new minister will bring about something new, unlike his predecessor.
Mr. Saito, as you said, you are quite close to the new foreign minister, but just to get yourself as an outsider, how would you comment about that? And now Japan is even discussing about whether to implement SAT. That's certainly going to have a lot of opposition once again from China as well. So he is likely to handle all of these chaos all at the same time, just dump on his head.
Yeah, one thing that I find refreshing and looking at it even from an outside perspective is that Minister Kono is more a straight shooter, that he's actually in fact pretty straight talking, so that's to some level of consternation to the Japanese people, that most Japanese people feel that sometimes he is too straight. But given his background and given his experience, and also given that he was also the Minister for Public Safety right before this, gives him that background. So I don't think that that juggling this is much of an issue. That I think you're going to see much more of a straight-laced and don't have to read between the tea leaves kind of foreign minister with Minister Kono.
But is this Foreign Minister Kono likely to raise his also opposition if he has a different policy suggestions from the Prime Minister? Is there going to be some inside the cabinet discussion, if not debate? Mr. Saito.
I think debate is good. I think debate is healthy. I think it's good. I think what Minister Kono brings is context and perspective. And at the end of the day, all the ministers serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister, that there are these discussions. But to bring the counterpoints and the discussion in this so that these voices are reflected and it's not just one-sided, I think that someone like Minister Kono would do that very judiciously and very fairly.
Well, one of the things both of you have mentioned is what is likely to be the mindset of the Prime Minister. We have seen that track record over the past 10 years or so, but many people ask, why is he having a sudden fall, at least in approval rating? The Financial Times, for example, suggested that the public has never loved Mr. Abe, whose air of entitlement has always rankled. But they have liked the stability he has brought since the year 2012. Whenever that stability wobbles, he's quickly vulnerable. Mr. Yang, do you agree with that?
Yes, I think the sudden falling of the rating support reflects the disappointment of the Japanese public that the expected stability, political stability and sustainability has gone. So that is the fundamental reason. And some scandals actually play a role as a trigger.
And now, Mr. Saito, the Prime Minister brought in a new minister for economic revival and also economic restructuring. Is he likely to change the picture? We all understand the Abe economics seems to work to a certain extent, but the third arrow very much delayed the result of it. Are we going to see the third arrow once again coming out? Are we going to see some very different remedies?
No, I think that if you look at it fairly, it took 20 years for us to get to this point, that it's not going to be overnight that we fix this. And sure, there are lots of problems. The third arrow is always being tweaked. But if you think about where we are from when the Prime Minister came in, the levels of unemployment and that decreasing, the business confidence, the stock market, if you look at this from even both macro and microeconomic measures, Japan is actually doing very well since the Prime Minister has come on board. Now, with any administration, complacency and these things come into effect, but I think that the policies and stuff, they're not going to change overnight. I don't think we're going to see any big changes here. It's just really pushing through and making sure that we execute.
The Prime Minister is having this in mind when he's changing the cabinet, Mr. Saito. That is, as long as he could remain the party head of the ruling party with the Liberal Democratic Party for Japan, according to your rules, the party head is likely to be naturally becoming the next Prime Minister. In other words, he's going to continue his term of the Prime Minister. And yet, we have seen also some of the controversy he has created, for example, about the Constitution, about the relationship between Japan and its neighbors, China, South Korea, and some of the others in Southeast Asia, and about history as well, about his family ties and track record, how they look at the war. So, Mr. Saito, even though you are the special advisor for the Prime Minister, but I'm sure you also have your own perspective as to whether this Prime Minister gonna be one supported both in Japan and respected widely, which Japan needs if it is a Prime Minister from Japan, internationally and regionally.
Yeah, no, and that's, I think, a very fair comment. However, to put this in context, that we're reshuffling cabinet exactly a year since the last one was put in place is actually a great improvement from when we used to have a new prime minister every 9 months. That's not an excuse per se, but I think what we're going to see here is, given that at the beginning of the year, the prime minister had one of the highest rating rates, and soon that we are here, the next presidency, as you have described, for the LDP is next September. So as everybody says, anything can happen in a year. I think the Prime Minister made a very important comment today that it's important to go back to the basics, to focus on what the needs of the voters are and so on. So I think the Prime Minister is reflecting on what got him here the second time around, and to focus on that and to build upon that original success. And so I think we're going to see some focusing back to how the Abe administration started off this round.
Mr. Yang, of course, the Japanese cabinet and the Japanese administration headed by Prime Minister Abe have been trying to play an international role as well. For an economy as big as Japan, that's what they should do too. But will Japan, with the new cabinet, be able to fulfill some of the earlier dreams, for example, trying to continue with the TPP despite of the US absence, trying to create, together with the other players in Northeast Asia, some kinds of mechanism to bring more stability into the region? Do you think it can do it or not, Mr. Yang?
Well, I think economically, Abe's cabinet can do something new in the regional economic arena through TPP, although that's shrunk dramatically after American withdrawal. But in the security and the political area in this region, there's no way for Japan to do something positive, both because of the historical disputes between Japan and its related neighboring countries, but also because of the Japan's ambition for the revision of the pacifist constitution that will cause a lot of uncertainties both in Japan and outside of Japan.
Mr. Saito, what's your view?
Well, I think that right now, like in many democratic economies and stuff, economy is front and center. That I think you're going to see a prime minister focusing on this. I think that even through all this news and so-called turmoil here, that the administration has moved forward. We're discussing things on TPP without the United States, of course, but we've also signed agreements with the EU and just
That's right.
ratified the EPA. So there are things there that are happening. But yeah, I think economically, things are starting to take off. The regional issues and so on, whether it's a constitution, these types of issues, like I mentioned earlier, I think the Prime Minister will probably be reflecting on some of these priorities and looking at how and where Japan should be focusing its energies on.
I see. Before we go, there is one critical issue. At this time, we all know all economies are trying to struggle to find a way out, break out of the old mold, try to embrace the new. And also, this is a time when the younger generation in many economies, particularly developed ones, feel they're being left out, that they don't think they're going to have better life than their parents, and not to mention, and even probably their grandparents' generation. So, Mr. Saito, I go to you because you work a lot on the entrepreneurship innovation in Japan. There has been a statistically suggesting even lack of entrepreneurship and motivation to be entrepreneurs by the Japanese youth. Do you think how, in a way, political atmosphere, cabinet shuffles, and also the social kinds of ideas will be able to change that picture?
I'm glad you actually brought that up. We actually do lots of other things in terms of economically being innovative. And one of the areas that I tell the Prime Minister that we should highlight a little bit more is, in the past, we used to set up special economic zones so that we could test new economic models and policies and so on. But in this round of the National Diet, one of the things that few people talk about, but I think is a big accomplishment, is something what we call the regulatory sandbox, which we hope not only entrepreneurs but large companies will use so that they can try new models, whether it's AI or blockchain or new technologies, and do this so that they're not afraid of being sued or overregulated and so on. So this is an area that I think is a huge shift in legislation that was just passed.